The first thing that caught the CEO's attention wasn't the empty chairs or the muted piano music drifting through the restaurant, it was the child's eyes. They were wide, watchful, and far too old for such a small face, scanning the room as if expecting it to disappear at any moment. Ethan Cross sat alone at his usual table near the window, the glow of the city reflected in the polished glass. At 42, he had everything most people dreamed of: power, wealth, respect, but the silence across from him had become unbearable. Dinner meetings filled his days, but nights like this were always the same: a spotless table, a flawless meal, and a hollow ache he could never quite explain. That was when he noticed them. A woman stood near the entrance, clutching a threadbare coat around herself. Her hair was neatly tied back despite the frayed ends, and exhaustion rested heavily on her shoulders. Beside her were two children, a boy no older than 10 and a little girl maybe 6 or 7, both trying very hard not to look hungry. The maitre d' was speaking in low, firm tones, his polite smile cracking as the woman nodded too many times, apologizing without words. Ethan knew that look. He had seen it in boardrooms when someone realized they were about to lose everything. Without fully thinking it through, he raised his hand. "Their dinner," he said calmly. "Put it on my bill." The maitre d' hesitated, surprised, then nodded. The woman's eyes widened when she was told. She turned, searching the room, and when her gaze met Ethan's, she froze. He offered a small nod, nothing more. No speeches, no pity. They were seated at a modest table not far from his. Ethan tried to return to his meal, but he couldn't stop glancing their way. The mother whispered to her children, her voice gentle despite the tension beneath it. The boy sat up straighter, clearly trying to be the man of the family, while the little girl swung her legs under the table, her eyes sparkling as plates of food arrived. Ethan's chest tightened. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd watched someone eat with genuine gratitude. As the meal went on, memories he'd buried began to surface. His own childhood hadn't always been champagne and chauffeurs. There was a time, long before the skyscrapers and headlines, when he'd lived in a cramped apartment with peeling paint and a father who worked himself into an early grave. A father who used to say, "If you ever get out, Ethan, don't forget what it felt like to be stuck." Ethan had promised himself he wouldn't forget. Somewhere along the way, he had. The family finished their meal quietly. The mother wiped her eyes when she thought no one was looking. Ethan signaled the server to include dessert, but before it arrived, the children stood. The boy gave an awkward, respectful nod in Ethan's direction. The mother mouthed, "Thank you," her voice failing her. The little girl, however, didn't follow them right away. She walked over to Ethan's table, her small shoes making soft tapping sounds against the floor. He looked up, surprised, expecting a shy thank you or perhaps a smile. Instead, she carefully placed something on the table beside his plate. It was a folded piece of paper. Ethan felt his breath catch as the child looked up at him, her expression serious but kind. "This is for you," she said softly. "Mom says when someone helps you, you should give them something back. Even if it's small." Before he could respond, she turned and ran back to her family, slipping her hand into her mother's as they left the restaurant and disappeared into the night. Ethan stared at the paper, his hands trembling as he unfolded it. Inside was a drawing, done in crayon. It showed a man sitting alone at a table, a big empty space across from him. In the next picture, the table was full, people smiling, hands reaching toward each other. Above it, written in careful, uneven letters, were the words, "You look lonely. I hope you're not anymore." Ethan froze. The noise of the restaurant faded, the city lights blurring as his vision filled with tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in decades. That child hadn't just seen him as a man who paid for dinner. She had seen him, truly seen him, in a way no shareholder or journalist ever had. He folded the drawing and placed it in his jacket pocket like something sacred. That night, Ethan didn't go back to his penthouse. Instead, he sat in his car for a long time, staring at the drawing, thinking about promises made and forgotten. By morning, he had made a decision. Over the following weeks, Ethan began to change his routine. He funded a shelter not far from the restaurant, one that focused on keeping families together. He set up job programs, counseling services, and safe housing, quietly, without press releases or photo ops. And every Friday night, he volunteered there himself, serving meals, listening to stories, learning names. He never found the family again, no matter how often he looked. But he carried the little girl's drawing with him everywhere, a reminder that kindness didn't just fill stomachs, it filled spaces in the heart we didn't know were empty. Months later, on a crowded evening at the shelter, Ethan stood at the end of a long table, surrounded by laughter and clinking cups. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. He reached into his pocket, touched the folded paper, and smiled. Sometimes, the smallest gifts carry the greatest truths. And sometimes, it takes a child with a crayon and a kind heart to remind a lonely CEO that wealth means nothing unless it's shared, and that the cure for loneliness is not power, but connection.